Hi guys, it's Emily here with Philly Goldies. I'm coming to you with another video today, and today we're going to talk about wen trimming. So recently, if you guys follow me on Instagram, you'll know that I trimmed the wen of my big oranda Boofie, who is right here, right behind me. So I did that procedure and filmed the whole process and wanted to share that with you on YouTube because I figured maybe some of you would be interested in watching it or interested in learning how to possibly do this at home. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. I'm going to talk to you first about kind of an introduction about what wens are and when you should trim your fish's wen and all that good stuff. And then I'll have the surgical video kind of footage towards the end of this video. So if you want to kind of just see that, I'll try to put somewhere down here like the time when that starts. Otherwise, if you want to hear this whole video, then just keep on watching. Thanks so much. So before you go ahead and trim a wen, you kind of need to know what a wen is. So a wen is a certain head growth that occurs on varieties of fancy goldfish, specifically ranchus, orandas, lionheads, telechus, some other random ones, any goldfish that has that big meaty head growth that some people think is, oh my gosh, is that a tumor? No, it's a wen. And a wen is basically just fat. So it's a collection of these fat deposits that have sort of an epithelial or skin tissue over it, but for the most part it's just fat, which is really good for wen trimming because that means that it's fairly avascular and doesn't have a big nerve supply. So what that means is when you cut it, it's not going to bleed very much and it's not going to hurt the fish very much. So those are great news. It's basically like skin. So if you think about when you skin your knee, it has that little capillary pleating where you have those little tiny blood vessels that are in there, but you don't have large arteries or veins or anything scary like that. And you do have some nerve sensation, but not a lot. So that's good news for us in terms of surgery. But that's basically what a wen is. Wens don't really serve a purpose, to be honest. They're more, something that we've bred into the fish for decoration or cosmetic purposes because we think that they make them look cute, which I happen to agree. But they're not like a functional part of the fish's body that you need to be concerned about affecting. So I get a lot of questions about how do I make my fish's wen grow bigger? And it's kind of complicated because a lot of it is due to genetics. So a lot of it we don't have a lot of control over because it's, what the fish was born with. If it's going to have a big wen, it's going to have a big wen. But you can encourage wen growth, and it's the same way that you encourage any kind of growth in your fish. So it's a lot of clean water, So do a lot of water changes frequently. And then good quality variety in diet. So if you have younger fish and you want to encourage wen growth, adding more protein into the diet can help, and you can do that in several ways. You can add in fresh foods like frozen bloodworms or brine shrimp, or you can add in pelleted foods like I have some here. This is the Hikari food sticks, and this is made for carnivorous fish like Oscars and arowanas and cichlids. These are the floating kind that I got on accident. I would recommend the sinking kind if you can find them, which they do make. But these are like high in protein as well as just any cichlid pellet. This is just the Aquion kind that I got at PetSmart, but any variety of cichlid pellet has a higher content of protein, and you can use those in your goldfish. You don't want them to make up the entirety of their diet because it's not complete and balanced for goldfish, but supplementing it with these kinds of foods that are higher in protein can help to encourage that wen to grow. So the next question we need to answer is, when should I trim my fish's wen, or do I have to trim my fish's wen? And the answer is no, you don't always have to. So there are a lot of orandas and ranchus that will go their entire lives without needing a wen trim, and that's great. That's ideal. That's what we want. We don't want to ever have to do this procedure because it is a surgical procedure. And that's, I guess, what I want to kind of stress in this part of the video is you should only trim your fish's wen if it's impacting its quality of life to the point where your choice is either Wen trimming, or euthanasia. And that sounds extreme, but that's what I believe, because Wen trimming it's a surgical procedure. It requires anesthesia. It has risks. I've had fish die after this procedure, so it's not something that is benign and that's no big deal. It's not like getting your hair cut or something like that. Like, it is intense. I did my wen trimming on Boofie because his wen growth was so big that it was covering his gills, and that's the main reason why I did this. So his gills, every time he breathed, they could only open about 40 or 50% of the way down at the bottom. The upper half of it had all overgrown with wen, so he couldn't breathe at all, and that was making me, it was impacting his quality of life. He wasn't as active. He would kind of float up at the top of the tank and just sit there. And when my power went out, before I had any backup air pumps, when my power went out, he almost died. The power was out for an hour, and because there was no surface movement or no pumps or no filtration, he almost died during that time. And so that kind of scared me and made me realize that, his wen growth is getting to a point where it's actually an issue for him, and he wasn't interactive. He had kind of stopped eating. He was floating up at the top of the tank, like I said, and he wasn't happy anymore. And this, he had been blind for a long time because of his wen. So that's another point that I want to bring up, is that just because your fish's wen covers its eyes does not mean that it needs to be trimmed. So a lot of fish do very well being blind. Sight is not their primary sense, I guess you'd say. For humans, sight's very important for us, but for a fish, if you think about in their natural habitat in a pond, or that's kind of murky. Visibility is pretty poor in a pond to begin with, and so they rely on scent, they rely on their lateral line, they rely on their other senses a lot more than sight. That's not to say that it doesn't give them a disability, and it's true. I mean, your fish, when they can't see, are going to have a more difficult time getting food than your fish that can see. And so you do need to maybe give them a little extra TLC, or hand feed them, or maybe separate them into a handicap tank like I had in Philly, where I had like all my split bladder and my blind fish like in one tank, because they were all little special needs. So you can do things like that. But being blind in and of itself, I wouldn't say is a reason to wen trim, because it's just not worth the risk. I forget where I heard it, but somebody either said or I read it somewhere, that a blind fish is better than a dead fish, and that's true. And that's what you need to kind of keep in mind before you do this, is a blind fish is better than a dead fish. And if what you have is not better than a dead fish, or if you're not about to euthanize your fish because of its wen overgrowth, then you shouldn't do this procedure. The risks are such that your fish may die. And I'm not trying to scare people away from doing it, but I'm just trying to stress that it's not a cosmetic procedure, and it's not a benign procedure, and it's not something that should be taken lightly. That being said, there is a point where it needs to be done, and that's, I guess the next section we'll talk about how to do it, and when you actually have to do it, what does that involve? So once you have decided that your fish's wen needs to be trimmed, you'll want to know a little bit more about the surgery itself and what's involved there. So like I said, it is a surgery. It does involve general anesthesia. The general anesthesia is not necessarily for the pain, or because of the pain or the bleeding in the procedure. If this procedure was being done in you or I, it probably would be done just under like lidocaine local anesthesia, because it doesn't actually hurt that much, and there's not actually a lot of bleeding or structures, important structures involved. It's just that a fish, once you take it out of water to do a surgery on it, it doesn't sit still. And so the general anesthesia is basically to cause your fish to be still while you're doing the procedure, so you avoid poking it in the eyeball or doing crazy things like that and hurting it. So that being said, general anesthesia is the part that where the main risks of this procedure are involved, and that's because anesthesia at home is not necessarily very well regulated or easily controllable. If you have a fish veterinarian in your area, this is a procedure that would be easily done by them, and I would highly recommend taking your fish to them rather than doing this at home. It's going to be a lot safer with a fish veterinarian. They use a fish anesthetic called MS-222, which is a lot safer than the at-home easily available fish anesthetic, which is clove oil. So if you're going to use, if you have a fish vet available, do that. Just don't try and do it at home. Take them there. It's going to be safer for your fish. But a lot of people do not have a fish veterinarian close, or they do not have the finances to do that. And in which case you can attempt this procedure at home using clove oil as your anesthetic. So clove oil works as an anesthetic for fish. You can get clove oil online or at a lot of sort of whole food, vitamin supplement kind of stores. It's used in humans a lot for toothache, so it may be in like the dental teeth care kind of section. But I got mine online. I got the brand Nature's Alchemy Clove Bud 100% pure essential oil. I like this brand. I'm not going to say that this is the best brand out there. It's just what I happen to pick up, and it has worked for me, both for euthanasia and for anesthesia. So the issue with getting, any of these essential oils or, supplement type things online is that essential oils and supplements are not regulated by the FDA in any way. So there's no standards about how much essential oil needs to be in there, how pure the essential oil needs to be, or there's nobody fact checking them to determine if the claims on their labels are true. So you do need to be a little bit careful with that, because especially if you get a new bottle and you don't know how it behaves, it may be a lot stronger or a lot weaker than the previous bottle you've used before, or stronger or weaker than this one that I've used, or etc. So you do need to be careful with that. So always start on the low end of any recommended anesthetic doses and work your way up, unless you're trying to euthanize your fish, in which case you're never going to overdo it, so go ahead. But for the purposes of this video, for Wen trimming and fish surgery, always start on the low end and work your way up. So like I said, I got this Nature's Alchemy Clove Bud Oil, and the recommended dosage of clove oil for anesthetic for your fish is 3 to 5 drops per gallon of water. And so what I usually do is I'll take a little Tupperware container like this, and I scoop a little bit of tank water in, put 3 drops of the clove oil in there, shake it up real well, because then the oil will kind of mix with the water, because oil and water don't normally mix. So you have to shake it up in order for it to kind of distribute within the water. Pour that into your anesthetic tank that you're going to use for your fish, and wait 1 to 2 minutes to see how your fish reacts to that. If it still needs more, take a little bit more, add 1 more drop, shake it up, pour it in, and just keep going until you get the desired level of anesthesia for your fish. Always wait a certain amount of time before adding more anesthetic, as your fish may be just taking a little bit more time. As they get deeper under anesthesia, they take less breaths per minute, therefore they are taking in less anesthetic per minute. So once your fish starts to get under, wait longer before adding in more anesthetic to the water. So I guess I'll do a little brief overview of kind of what this surgery involves, or what surgery on your fish involves, and then I'll do sort of a voiceover over my surgical footage that I have to give you more specifics about what I do in the procedure itself. But for fish anesthesia in general, you're going to have a recovery tank. Doesn't have to be big, it can be a bucket, it can be a container, it doesn't have to be huge. And then you're going to have an anesthetic tank and a recovery tank. So you're going to have 2 containers full of water. Each of them should have an air stone, and each of them should be dechlorinated with a water dechlorinator. I use Prime, but you can use whatever you use. So you got both of those set up and running. at all times. And then the concept of fish anesthesia is you're going to take your fish, you're going to put it in the anesthetic water. You're going to add your anesthetic up until the point where your fish is well anesthetized. And for this particular procedure, what that means is that your fish is kind of on its side, unable to right itself, but is not stopped breathing. It's still breathing very well. Its gill movements are still regular, but it just is unable to right itself in the water. So once that level is achieved, you're going to take that fish out, do what you need to do. You're going to do your surgical procedure for a maximum of 30 seconds to a minute, and then you're going to put it back into the water. So you're only taking your fish out for short periods of time, and that's so that their gills stay moist so that they can still breathe. So you take your fish out, you do some surgery, you put it back in. You take your fish out, you do some surgery, you put it back in. If your fish is getting too deep, when you put it back in, you're going to put it back into the recovery pool. If your fish is still awake and flapping, you're going to put it back into the anesthetic pool. You kind of want to err on the side of light anesthesia for this procedure because, like I said, the procedure itself is not that painful, and what you're aiming for is just basically immobilization of your fish to the point where you can do surgery on it. So you're going to, like I said, take it out, put it back in, take it out, put it back in, until you're done, and then you put it in the recovery tank and you let it recover in there fully. So I usually leave them in the recovery tank for about an hour, and you're going to do that until they're fully swimming around, breathing well, acting normally, and then you can put them back into the main tank. So the Wen trimming surgery itself, like I said, it's not a very bloody procedure, it's not a very painful procedure, but it is still surgery, and so you are still going to be cutting your fish. And so if that in and of itself gives you like a panic attack, maybe this is not something you should attempt. I'm a veterinarian, so I'm used to doing surgery on dogs and cats every single day. And so, you know, the whole surgery and blood and surgical instruments and anesthesia, that part of it, you know, doesn't really bother me at all. But I know that it definitely can bother people out there. So if you are someone who's going to be panicking so much or shaking so much that you can't do this, you know, maybe it's best to either find somebody else who can do it for you or not do it at all. Because you are going to have to work quickly. Like I said, you're going to be putting your fish in there, and then you're going to have 30 seconds to a minute to work before you need to put it back in the water. So you need to be able to just go for it. Grab and cut and grab and cut. And all you're going to be doing is just cutting off pieces of wen, you know, kind of strategically. Obviously, your goal is to uncover the gills and then uncover the eyes. And so that's what I did with Boofie, which you'll see in the footage. You cut the wen off around its eyeballs and around its gills. So the eyeball is fairly resilient, so you want to definitely be careful. You're going to be cutting and using sharp instruments around your fish's eye, so obviously be careful, but it's not as easy to scratch or puncture the eye as you may think. So now I'm going to go into the surgical footage of this video. So I'm going to hopefully do a voiceover for you so I can tell you what I'm doing there. The surgical footage is fairly choppy, I'll warn you, because I was filming and doing surgery by myself. So, you know, a lot of the times it'll cut out, and where it's cutting out is where he's back in the recovery tank. And most of the video footage I have is me actually, you know, cutting and doing the surgery itself. But just note that every time the video cuts off, it's because he's back in the tank. But yeah, I hope that this video has been helpful for you. I hope that if you attempt this surgery at home that you are successful. I hope that you don't have to do the surgery at home, but if you do, like I said, I hope that this has given you some information to make you feel more comfortable in doing it. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my Instagram handle is @Philly_goldies, and I'd love for you to follow me there. That's where I do most of my fish updating kind of things, but I do hope to be doing more YouTube videos soon. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye! So for this procedure, you'll need a surface to work on. I used a cutting board, and you'll want to cover it in saran wrap or plastic wrap. And the reason for doing that is so that the fish's slime coat does not get damaged by getting stuck to your cutting board or your work surface. Then you will need clove oil for your anesthetic, and again the dose is 3 to 5 drops per gallon of water. Then in addition to that, you'll also want to have a pair of tweezers or forceps, as well as a pair of scissors. You can use manicure or nail scissors, but you want them to be sharp, so you want them to be new. Then I'm a veterinarian, so I also have scalpel blades, but I didn't really use them very much for this procedure. You'll also want a pair of plastic gloves so that you're not touching the fish with your bare hands. In addition, so now you have your recovery tank and your anesthetic tank. Both of these tanks have fresh, clean water with a dechlorinator in them. This is my recovery tank, and then the clear 2.5 gallon tank is my anesthetic tank. I do switch the air stone between the tanks depending on which tank the fish is in. So this anesthetic tank is where I'll be putting my anesthetic as well as my fish. So this is Boofie before his Wen trimming procedure. He's not yet sedate or anesthetized in this footage. He's just being a really good fish for me. But as you can see, the wen growth covers both of his eyes as well as the upper portion of his gills. So especially at the end of this footage, you'll be able to see that every time he takes a breath, really only the tiny bottom portion of his gills are able to open, which is causing him some difficulty in life, which is why I decided to do this procedure on him today. So at this point, Boofie is in the anesthetic tank. I've added 3 drops of clove oil to this water, and he's starting to get a little bit sedate. He's not yet, anesthetized or at the point where I'd want to do surgery on him yet, but he is getting to be a little bit, more groggy than he was before. You can also see that he's starting to get a little bit of vasodilation or increased red veins in his fins, and that's normal. That's just a sign of stress. This is a stressful procedure for him, so that's kind of to be expected. But I do end up adding some more anesthetic because he didn't quite get to the level that I wanted with 3 drops. So at this point, Boofie has reached the level of anesthesia that I want him to be at. As you can see, he's flipped himself kind of sideways and he cannot right himself in the water anymore, but he's still breathing quite regularly and normally. So this is the level that you want him to be at. For me personally, this took about 5 or 6 drops of clove oil per gallon. However, like I said before, every bottle of essential oil is a little different, so always start on the low end and work your way up. But for me personally, this was about 5 or 6 drops in. But as you can see, he's pretty sleepy right now, flipping himself over, and like I said, that's kind of the level that we want him to be at right now. So once your fish is at the appropriate level of anesthesia, you can take them out and start to do surgery on them. As you can see here, I've placed him on the cutting board wrapped in saran wrap, and I start to take my manicure scissors and trim the wen around his eyes. The wen is very gelatinous. It literally feels like you're cutting jello. So it is difficult to cut. He's also flapping around a little bit here. He's at a fairly light level of anesthesia for this, partially because I'm a little bit of a weenie when it comes to anesthesia with my fish, but also because I can be for this procedure, because like I said before, it's not a very painful procedure in and of itself. The fish is basically stressed because it's out of the water, and it's kind of their natural instinct to flap around because of that. But he's not flapping here because of the pain or because of, the discomfort of this procedure. He's flapping just because he's out of the water. But it does make it a little bit more difficult to do surgery, so that's why we use anesthesia. So I trim a little bit, or as much as I can, until he's too mobile, or until my 30 seconds to a minute have gone up. And then you'll see I'll pick him up and put him back into the anesthetic water so that he can get some more breaths and get a little bit deeper under anesthesia before I go again and try to trim off some more. So here I am putting him back in, and then I wait. I wait about 30 seconds to a minute in between it, and then I pull him back out again. So here I am pulling him back out, and again I just go back in and trim more and more and more. It's going to be difficult to trim away too much, but you want to work quickly and you want to kind of prioritize. So I am trimming out his eyeballs here to the point where I'm satisfied where it looks good. Here I try to use the scalpel blade
but then I realized that it's a little bit too jello-y for that to work. The scissors actually work a lot better. And like I said, these are just nail scissors or manicure scissors. You can get it, you know, your local pharmacy or Target or something like that. But they are new and they are sharp, and that's the most important thing. So then I take him back out again, and now I'm going to start to work on the other side here. So I'm working to uncover his right eye in this section here. Again, just grabbing and trimming and grabbing and trimming. It does help to sort of grab a little bit with your forceps and then use the scissors to kind of cut off the section that you've grabbed there. Depending on the anatomy of your fish, you may need to trim more above or below the eye. Here, Boofie has really big cheeks that kind of cover his eye more so than the one above, you know, falling over his eyes. So I focused more on trimming away his cheeks. And you want to try to make it as symmetrical as possible. And again, you are working towards the eye, so just never point your scissors down towards the eye. Always kind of have the point sideways or parallel to the surface of the eye, and that'll prevent you from actually cutting into the eye or injuring the eye itself. I did flip him around here just because I'm right-handed, so I'm sorry that it's a little bit not as good of a view for you guys to watch, but I figured his safety in his eyes and the ease of me doing surgery was a little bit more important here, so I apologize for that, but I just keep cutting. Again, it's very hard to cut. It's a really weird feeling to be cutting through this stuff. Now I'm putting him back in. And that time when I put him back in, it wasn't necessarily because he was flopping around or getting too mobile, but my 30 seconds of work time had gone up, so I was giving him a little bit of a break. If you need to have somebody time you when you're working with your fish, that's totally okay. You can have a little stopwatch there and have them say, now it's time to put him back in. So here I am taking him back out, and now I'm going to start to work on his gills here. So I'm not cutting the actual gills itself. You can injure the gills that way. So just make sure you're only trimming the wen part off of the surface of the gills and you're not actually cutting into the operculum themselves. In Boofie's case, his gill growth is mostly towards the upper part of his gills here. So that's where I'm focusing most of my trimming, getting off that wen so that there's less weight on the gills so that it's less of an effort for him to breathe. Then I go back to his eyes a little bit here, just because I wasn't satisfied with how it looked. And putting him back into the water. So now I'm working on trimming the wen above his left gill area here. As you can see, this procedure is not very bloody at all. There is a little bit of redness around his left eye, which is where I've done the trimming in the previous footage. But all in all, it's not a very bloody procedure at all, which makes it nicer for us. You can see how red his tail is. That's because he's very vasodilated and stressed out. He's not having a very good day. But as you can see, he's still breathing really well. His gill movements are still very regular. So I'm not concerned that he's too deep at all. I'm being careful here not to trim his actual gill itself, just trimming the wen above it. Sorry, my hand is in the footage here. So now I'm going to go back and trim a little bit around his eye. And then once I'm done with that, I will be done with trimming his wen. So this is all I'm going to do. I could stay here all day trimming the wen around his eyes and, you know, trimming it all off, but I don't want to do this. I want to make it as short as possible for him. So with that, we are done with the actual surgery itself. So now Boofie's in the recovery pool, or bowl in this case. So this is just fresh, clean water with the chlorinator, and he's kind of sleeping off the anesthesia. As you can see, he's moving around really a lot better now. He's moving his fins. He's able to keep himself upright. He's doing really well. I usually leave them in this recovery pool for at least about an hour so that he can, fully sleep off all of it before going back into the main tank with his little buddies. And then this is Boofie now, back in his home with his friends. He's doing really, really well. He's a lot more active. He's a lot more interactive with me. He's better able to find food. He's grown and he's gained weight. So I'm really happy with how this procedure turned out, and I hope that you guys have found this video helpful and that it's given you some tips and tricks and answered some questions about Wen trimming for you. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Thanks.